August 21st, 1942. The coconut grove at the mouth of Alligator Creek on Guadalcanal. A column of Japanese soldiers from the Ichiki detachment was massed for another charge across the sandbar. They never saw the mortar team. 60 yards behind the firing line, 3 Marines from G Company of the 1st Marines knelt around a 42-pound tube. The corporal did not need to call battalion. He did not need to request divisional fires or wait for a battery 5 miles in the rear to register the target. He sighted the position himself. The gunner fed a 3-pound shell down the barrel. A Marine on the line described what happened in plain words. Bodies and parts of bodies flew into the air, along with great splashes of mud and bits of palm tree. That was the M2 60mm mortar. American infantrymen called it pocket artillery. To the Axis defenders on the receiving end, it was the sky coming down on their heads. Every American rifle platoon in World War II faced the same arithmetic problem. A hand grenade reached 30 yards. The battalion 81mm mortar reached 3,000. Between those two numbers was the killing zone, where the riflemen lived and where the enemy machine guns hid. In Normandy, that killing zone had walls. The bocage country was a labyrinth of hedgerows up to 15 feet tall, ancient earthen embankments crowned with brush, every field a kill box. 21st Army Group's post-war assessment concluded that mortars caused roughly 70% of Allied infantry casualties in Normandy through July of 1944. American crews learned within days that calling divisional artillery on a hedgerow was a way to kill your own platoon. The shells clipped tree branches and detonated 30 feet above the foxholes. November 1944, the Hurtgen Forest, 3 months after the Normandy breakout. First Lieutenant George Wilson of Company F, 2nd Battalion, 22nd Infantry Regiment, 4th Infantry Division, watched the same tree bursts shred his rifle squads. The howitzer rounds came in at a shallow angle and exploded in the canopy overhead. The only weapons that could put steel on the forest floor without killing the men in the holes were the high-angle mortars, the big 81s 2 miles back, and the 60mm tubes the riflemen carried themselves. The Americans needed a weapon that could be carried by infantry, set up in seconds, and dropped on a target the platoon commander could point to with his finger. That weapon already existed. The Americans had bought it from the French in 1938, the Brandt MLE 1935. Designed by the French ordnance engineer Edgar Brandt as a battalion-level light mortar, the weapon was a smoothbore, drop-fired tube that broke down into 3 loads a single squad could carry. The War Department purchased 8 Brandt mortars in 1938, redesigned the drawings to American threads and materials at Watervliet Arsenal, and standardized the result as the Mortar 60mm M2. The first contract went to Reed Machinery in York, Pennsylvania in January of 1940. By the end of the war, the United States had built roughly 60,000 tubes and fired more than 51 million 60mm shells. In the first 8 months of 1945 alone, American factories produced over 30,000 mortars, almost matching the entire output of the previous 3 years combined. The weapon weighed 42 pounds, broken into 3 loads, a 12.8-pound barrel for one man, a 16.4-pound bipod for another, and a base plate that matched the barrel at 12.8. 3 men carried the gun, 2 more carried the shells. What it did was simple. The gunner dropped an M49 HE shell down the barrel. A fixed firing pin at the base of the tube struck a small ignition cartridge in the shell's tail. The propellant burned, the shell flew. Maximum range, 2,017 yards at 45 degrees elevation. A bursting radius of 17 yards on impact. Sustained rate of fire, 18 rounds a minute. A trained crew could put a shell on a target within seconds of the platoon leader pointing. August 7th, 1942. The 1st Marine Raider Battalion went ashore on Tulagi as the M2 went to war. By the second day, Major Justice Chambers of Company D was hitting Hill 281 with a heavy mortar concentration. M2s from the Weapons Company, 81s from 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. The Japanese position broke and the riflemen pushed through. The pocket artillery had passed its first test. It would not be the last. D-Day, June 6, 1944. Brécourt Manor in Normandy. 1st Lieutenant Richard Winters of Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment had a problem. 4 German 105mm howitzers in a hedgerow gun pit were ranging in on Utah Beach, where the 4th Infantry Division was coming ashore. Winters had 13 men and a plan. The plan worked. Easy Company took the guns one by one. But Winters could not hold the position without covering fire to withdraw. Sergeant Donald Malarkey ran the 60mm mortar section for Easy Company. He had jumped out of a C-47 the night before, and the base plate of his M2 had gone into a Norman field somewhere over Sainte-Mère-Église, along with most of the other heavy gear on the drop. He had a tube, he had a bipod, he had shells. He bore-sighted the gun with his eye, set the bipod into the dirt, and started dropping rounds. He fired so many shells that the recoil drove the tube into the soft French earth. The blasts shattered every window in the manor house. The German MG-42 teams along the hedgerow stopped firing. Easy Company withdrew. 4 heavy howitzers had been silenced. A paratrooper with no baseplate had used a 42-pound tube to suppress a German strongpoint on D-Day. The same tube, used the same way, was about to do worse things in the Pacific. September 15th, 1944, Peleliu. The 1st Marine Division stepped into a coral meat grinder that Major General William Rupertus had predicted would last 4 days. It lasted 73. Corporal Eugene Sledge of K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, was a 60mm mortarman on Peleliu. Then he was a 60mm mortarman on Okinawa. Late May 1945. Half Moon Hill on the southern shoulder of the Shuri Line. The 6th Marine Division had taken Sugarloaf in 10 days at a cost of 2,662 killed and wounded. That single 10-day toll equaled the entire 2nd Marine Division's casualties at Tarawa. K Company of 3-5 was now finishing the job on the reverse slope. A radio message came down. A large number of Japanese were massing behind the crescent of Half Moon's western arm, hidden in cave positions the Americans could not see and could not reach with direct fire. Sledge's 3-tube section was ordered into a mass fire mission, squared away to box in the target and prevent escape. Searching and traversing. Rapid fire. In Sledge's own words from his memoir, With the Old Breed, the tube became so hot, the mortarman wrapped a dungaree jacket around it, and an ammo bearer poured helmets full of water from a shell crater over the cloth to cool the steaming barrel while they continued to fire. The crew burned through hundreds of shells before the ceasefire order came. A K Company NCO walked the reverse slope of Half Moon Hill afterward. He counted more than 200 Japanese dead. They had been trapped and killed by the fire from 3 42-pound tubes operated by 5 Marines. That was what the 60mm mortar could do when it was used as designed. If you've made it this far, and you appreciate the detail in these stories, hit subscribe so they keep showing up in your feed. The strangest single use of the M2 in the entire war is about to happen on the morning of April 13th, 1945, on Okinawa. That story is next. April 13th, 1945, Kakazu Ridge, 96th Infantry Division, 1st Battalion, 381st Infantry Regiment had been hammering at the ridge for 4 days. The previous afternoon, Company A had been thrown back 3 times by pre-registered Japanese mortar and machine gun fire. 22-year-old Technical Sergeant Buford Anderson from Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin, ran the mortar squad for the weapons platoon of Company A.
He stood 5'7" and weighed 130 pounds. He already had a Bronze Star from Leyte. In the pre-dawn hours of April 13th, a reinforced Japanese battalion came through the saddle between Kakazu Ridge and Kakazu West, aiming for Anderson's flank. Anderson estimated 75 men in the column that hit his position. He ordered his squad into an old Okinawan burial tomb behind the firing line. Then he walked out alone with his carbine. The first thing he did was empty a magazine into the screaming attackers at point-blank range. The second thing he did was pick up a Japanese mortar dud that landed near him, throw it back into the column, and watch it kill several Japanese soldiers when the fuse finally functioned. The third thing he did was reach for his squad's box of M49 60mm HE shells. He pulled the safety wire from the first round. He banged the tail cap against a rock to ignite the propellant primer. He threw the shell like an oversized hand grenade, the point detonating M52 fuse armed in flight. The shell exploded among the charging Japanese. He kept doing it, carbine fire, shell after shell, bleeding profusely from a severe shrapnel wound. When the Japanese finally broke off and withdrew, his squad and his company's flank were intact. The count on the ground in front of his position was 25 enemy dead, several machine guns destroyed, and several Japanese knee mortars destroyed. Buford Anderson had used the 60mm mortar as a hand-thrown weapon. He had used it because his crew was in cover and the enemy was 20 yards away. He had used it because nothing else was reaching him in time. President Truman pinned the Medal of Honor on him at the White House on May 30th, 1946. The Japanese had been using something similar to the M2 for years. They called it the Type 89 grenade discharger. American troops mistranslated the name and called it the knee mortar. One Marine on Guadalcanal tried bracing the curved baseplate against his thigh and shattered his own femur. A Japanese rifle platoon fielded 3 of those weapons organically. An American rifle platoon fielded none of them. The M2 belonged to the weapons platoon at company level. After Guadalcanal, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson of the 1st Raider Battalion wrote a report to the Marine Corps that read like a complaint. "We need the knee mortar badly," Edson said. "I believe the Japs have 3 of these mortars in a mortar squad in each rifle platoon. A man can carry 10 rounds on his person besides his weapon." End quote. That report drove the M19 variant program at Watervliet Arsenal. The Army rejected it. The Marines adopted it after the war and carried it into Korea and Vietnam. The M2 had real limitations. The minimum range was 200 yards. A pinned squad 20 yards from a German pillbox could not call its own mortar fire because the round would not arc that short. At Bastogne in December of 1944, the cold froze the M5A1 ignition cartridges and produced hang fires. The recoil drove base plates into the frozen mud and locked them in place. And every stack of empty shell cases beside a mortar pit was a visual signature for an enemy spotter. The Japanese killed Major Henry Courtney, executive officer of 2nd Battalion, 22nd Marines, on top of Sugarloaf, with accurate counter-mortar fire while he was directing the assault. The men firing the tube were never as safe as the men they were killing thought they were. Eugene Sledge survived Okinawa, finished with the old breed in 1981, and became the most read American voice of the Pacific Ground War. He had been a 60mm mortarman. The Infantry Rifle Company finally replaced the M2 with the M224 lightweight mortar in 1978. 3 M224s still ride in every American infantry weapons company. The barrel is shorter, the range is longer, the doctrine has not changed. A platoon leader points, a corporal drops to one knee, a shell is in the air in seconds. August 21st, 1942. The coconut grove at Alligator Creek. The men of the Achiki detachment never saw the mortar team that killed them. They only heard the soft thunk of the round leaving the tube. By the time they heard it, the sky was already coming down on their heads.